what I'm going to be talking about this evening is what in Sanskrit is called Sanatana Dharma, Darshana, Siddhanta. What Siddhanta means in Sanskrit means a philosophical conclusion. You know, people can talk about philosophy, people can talk about truth infinitely, as we know. You know, but for people who have been to my talks, you know that I can go on for a very long time. We all can. However, ultimately, there has to be a foundation for philosophy. There has to be a philosophical conclusion, a basis upon which philosophy is built. In Sanskrit, this is called, again, Siddhanta. So we're going to be talking about what is the basic philosophical foundation of Sanatana Dharma? What does it mean precisely to be a follower of Dharma, and what is the philosophy of Sanatana Dharma in a, maybe 40-minute nutshell or so, because I don't want to keep people here too long. Well, let's begin in this way. First, as human beings, as individuals who are in the human form of life, we are in a very special position. Because as we know, there are many different species, many different forms of life. There are millions, actually. In fact, very specifically, in Sanatana Dharma, in the Vedic scriptures, it says that there are 8,400,000 species of life. You know, how accurate that is, I don't know, but that's what the Vedas say. So in any case, we know that there are many, many different species. Well, we are fortunate enough to be in this human form of life. And the reason why we're fortunate is that it is in this human form of life, very specifically, that we have the ability to think about the important questions of life. We have the ability as human beings to question our existence. You know, most other beings can't, but we can. And we do all the time. You know, it's an interesting human phenomena. Regardless of where you are, regardless of where you find humans, regardless of their situation, their religion, their culture, their language, at one point or another, everyone asks themselves these important questions in life. For some people, it starts when they're very young. For some people, it's when they're older. You know, usually it starts when you're pretty young. But we ask ourselves these important questions of life. Why am I here? You know, who am I? Why is it that every morning when I wake up and I open my eyes, there is something here rather than nothing? You know, even that is a very fundamental question. Why is there a world? Why is it that when I open my eyes, there is something, not nothing? You know? And then on like this, all of these natural philosophical questions that arise from the human person, you know, just arise naturally. Now, the reason why we ask these questions and why it is so natural to us as living beings is precisely because all throughout our lives, there is a discomfort that is there when we don't tackle these questions. You know, Western philosophers, they've called this existential angst. Has anyone here ever heard of the existentialists? Existential philosophers, you know, these people are famous for this. Existentialism isn't quite as popular as it was in the past. But the existentialists, for example, would question existence. That's why they're called existentialists. And unfortunately, most of the existentialists were atheists. So they would go on for all of their lives in angst, in anxiety, in depression, not really coming to any conclusion. But truthfully, they were on the right track, because all of us, at one point or another, we have this thing gnawing at us, regardless of where we are, where we begin to indeed question, what is this all about? There has to be something more to life than just what I'm seeing, what I'm hearing. This is where the philosophical search begins. When we begin this philosophical search and we look around us, really there are only two ways in which we can view reality. There are only two ways in which we can view the world around us. Either A, when we look around us and when we contemplate the universe, we can come to the conclusion that, you know, everything seems to happen at random, everything seems to be chaotic, there doesn't seem to be really any intelligence behind things, therefore it must all be meaningless. You know? And honestly, a lot of people will end up coming to that conclusion and then again being in angst for the rest of their life, unfortunately. However, there is then the second way in which we can view reality. And that is that when we look at the world around us, we see meaning. You know, we understand that no, while things may sometimes seem chaotic, there is a grand design, a higher design. behind all things, that there is a divine intelligence that is there as the natural ordering principle of the world around us, you know? And that if we have the ability to discern, if we have the ability to sometimes just go into silence and allow the universe to speak to us, it does. And we begin to see the secret hidden hand of God behind all things. Okay? Now, this second way of viewing the world, that's Dharma. That's Dharma. Very, very simply. If we had to express what is meant by this word Dharma, that people who have come to my events in the past, you know, this is the word that I stress and stress and stress more than anything. Dharma, Dharma, Sanatana Dharma. The reason why I stress this so much, and the reason why in my stressing this, really I'm only copying what the Vedas do, what the scriptures do. The reason why the word is so stressed is because if we understand Dharma, we understand the meaning of everything. We understand what is hidden behind all things. And we also begin to understand our place in the universe. So this is the nature of Dharma. Now let's go a little bit deeper, continuing with this search. As we begin to have a glimpse of what is meant by Dharma, that yes, there is meaning to the world, and that if I explore philosophically and spiritually deeply enough, I can know that meaning. When the search begins, naturally it begins with self. It has to begin with self, you know? It's interesting. A lot of people have this idea that what does it mean to be on a spiritual search? They will envision literally someone kind of traversing, walking, wandering, you know, carrying a stick kind of like this, walking through forests, you know, walking to the tops of mountains and searching, searching, searching. The truth of the matter is, the search doesn't begin with a literal geographic type of, you know, change. In fact, on the contrary, the search begins here. Why is that the case? Before we can know anything, we have to know ourselves. Before we can know anything, we have to know the knower. Before we know anything, we have to know who is it who wishes to know this truth. And that begins here. This is why in every single great philosophy, religious and spiritual tradition on earth, you begin with self. Know thyself, Socrates said. So this is where it begins, is with this self-knowledge. When we begin this process of self-realization, you know, just literally focusing on ourselves, analyzing, both philosophically, okay, what is my true nature, but also experientially, in meditation, sitting and separating ourselves, quite literally separating ourselves from the objects of our senses, you know, which is why when we meditate we close our eyes, which is why when we meditate we're in silence, we still the senses, you know. But more than this, when we meditate, we still the mind. So even that inner chatter, that inner distraction, we separate ourselves from. When it comes to the point where in meditation we separate ourselves from all that which we are not, what we begin to discover is the most amazing thing. There's someone in there. There's someone in there. And that someone is us. It's the most amazing thing. You begin to quite literally feel your true self. You begin to experience your true self. And it comes to the point where, you know, theoretically you may have heard again and again and again from gurus, from reading scriptures, from so many sources. We may have heard this so many times that, oh, you are the soul within, you are the soul within. But you begin to quite literally feel it, experience it in a tangible way. So this is the beginning. And what is the nature of this self? The nature of the self is wondrous. The nature of the self is that it is in actuality the perfection of all that we are looking for. Everything that we're looking for outside of ourselves, what are we looking for? Just in everyday life. All human beings, and really, by extension, many living beings, almost all living beings, what do we search for? We search for beauty, we search for happiness, we search for security, you know, we search for light rather than darkness. You know, there's certain things that we look for. What we begin to realize once we start this process of self-realization is that everything that we thought we were looking for outside, it's already there, and it is our true self. All of these wonderful things are aspects of the true self. When we begin to discover our Atman, our actual spirit, what we discover is that, number one, it's blissful. It's blissful. This is why you will not find many advanced yogis who go into meditation and who will say, that was a horrible experience. I won't ask what's going on over there. Something else human beings all have to do. But you know, it's an interesting thing. You will not find advanced yogis who go into meditation and they'll tell you, oh yes, it was horrible, it was like torture. No, they're in bliss. When they meditate, they experience bliss. When they meditate, they experience everything that they've been searching for. They find fulfillment. You know, and that's the difference between external versus internal searching. With external searching, you know, anything that we're looking for, we don't ultimately find fulfillment. You know, we don't. There is no one object that we can acquire such that once we have it, that's it. I have everything I need. I can just sit down and just be happy and just be in bliss now for the rest of my life. There's no object that can give us that. You don't believe me? Try it. Try finding any object. Try getting the most beautiful $2 million home. Try getting a BMW and a Mercedes. Try knowing that you have $5 million in your bank account. Get that nose job you've always wanted. You know, do anything that you want to externally in order to give yourself that absolute fulfillment. And I guarantee that, yes, you'll have a little bit of happiness for a short period of time, but ultimately that absolute fulfillment will not be there. Actually, that is found within. So this is the beginning stage, self-realization. Now, interestingly, as we begin to meditate, we begin to discover something else. In addition to self, someone else coming up? Oh, very good. Very good. Come on in. You're just in time. Perfect timing. As we discover this self, it's a very natural thing that, interestingly, even though we now have fulfillment, we begin to realize something, and that is that that self is not alone. We begin to realize that that self does not exist in isolation. But that self also must have an origin. How do we know this? Because we realize that as wondrous as this self is, still it's limited. It's limited. You know, still it's finite, not infinite. How do we know this? Well, we were in illusion. It's that simple. We were in illusion. If we were truly infinite beings, if we were truly unlimited in the ontological sense, we would never have fallen into illusion to begin with. But rather, we did, which shows that we are dependent upon something else. You see? Anything that has the ability to fall under the influence of something else necessarily is weaker than that thing, and more is dependent upon something greater than itself. So as the self-realized person begins to analyze this more and more, that person begins to realize that there is a self of ourself, that there is a higher self, and that is Bhagavan, that is God. So we have our Atman, we have that self that we are, but then there is Paramatman, there's that higher self, that supreme self. And this is the second goal of Sanatana Dharma, the first being self-realization, the second being God-realization, knowing God. What is the nature of this object, this thing? We'll keep it neutral for now. This thing that we call God. What is the nature of this? You know, we use the word God in English. I use the word God very freely, you know, because it gives us some indication of what we're talking about. The word God, of course, comes from the German Gott, you know, meaning the good. But in actuality, to use the Sanskrit term, this is Brahman. This is Brahman. So we have Atman, which is the finite self. Then we have Brahman, the absolute God, who is the infinite self. So we have both of these. What is the nature of God? You know, so many religions speak about God. So many religions agree with the fact that God is the highest. God is that thing which is the summum bonum of life, the highest good in Latin, the greatest thing that we can know. But why? Why is this the case? You know, we hear all these things all the time. Oh, you should surrender to God. But we understand that, well, gee, if I surrender to someone, that person can abuse me, you know. We tend to confuse what it means to be God with what it means to be an imperfect, finite being. Well, let's understand what precisely it means to be God, what it means to be Brahman. First, Brahman janmadyasya yataha. Janmadyasya yataha is a verse from the Brahma Sutras. And this is a definition of God. God is that which is the origin of all things. God is that which is the origin of all things. Let's begin with this. We know that everything exists in terms of cause and effect. Everything, at least in the material world, exists as a result of cause and effect. Well, this is an argument that many people have used, including in the West, actually. St. Augustine used this comment. They used this interesting proof for God's existence. When you trace cause and effect, cause and effect, cause and effect back far enough, and you come to that cause which has no cause itself, you have reached Brahman. You have reached Brahman. You have reached the Absolute. You know, in the spiritual sense, there is no causality, but there is dependency. So that being upon who all things depend for their very existence, that also is Brahman. That also is God. It's described that God, Brahman, is the ontological source and grounding of all reality. In other words, everything exists as a result of God's mercy and God's mercy alone. Everything has its existence secured merely because of the very presence of God within whatever that particular thing is. You know? And that's true both materially as well as spiritually, interestingly. This is why God is described as, again, the self of our self. We have our spirit, but then God is the indwelling spirit even within our spirit, giving our very spirit its very existence. You know? There is nothing in existence, nothing we can point to, nothing that we can think of that doesn't have God present within it. And what is the nature of God? Well, God, of course, has infinite positive attributes, wonderful attributes. Think of any positive adjective that you can think of. Anything. Good, lovely, wonderful, gigantic, powerful. Think of any positive adjective that you can think of. And carry that list forward infinitely. And if you can imagine every single one of those attributes, but taken to an unlimited degree, that does not even express the essence of God. Rather, these are only the attributes of the divine. So this gives us some idea of how truly wondrous God is. Now, this is very nice, but what does this have to do with us? You know, it's nice understanding that, well, there's someone and the person is very wonderful, very nice, very powerful. However, what does this have to do with us? It has everything to do with us. Because again, God is present within us as the very foundation of our being. And more than this, one of the primary attributes of the divine is love. And due to that love, we're never separated from God. We're never separated from the divine. In the Taittiriya Upanishad, there is this wonderful, wonderful analogy that's given. And I'm sure many people have heard this. But let me give this analogy again anyway, because it describes our relationship with God very, very nicely. In the Taittiriya Upanishad, it asks us to envision that there is a tree, very, very large tree. On the tree, there are two birds who are sitting on that tree. The two birds look similar, but they're not. One bird is eating the fruits of that tree, just furiously, quickly, with tremendous hunger, just eating, not noticing anything around it. The second bird is behind that first bird, and the second bird is not eating of the fruits of the tree. Rather, that second bird is just observing the first bird, peacefully, calmly, not judging, just observing. And it ends there. Now, what's the point of this analogy? What is the point of it? Who would we say that first bird is? Anyone? Yeah, that first bird is us. That first bird is the Atman. You know, what is that tree?
Materiality.
Yeah, everything around us, everything that we try to enjoy. In the same way that bird is just eating, just thinking about itself, in the same way we try to enjoy this world. But what do we not realize, like that first bird? That there's a second bird. And that bird is a hidden witness, a secret witness, who is there with us, patiently observing us, patiently waiting for us to realize that we're not alone. It's the most amazing thing to think that our very best friend is with us right now. When we are absolutely, completely alone, we're not alone. Our best friend is there with us, in our hearts, constantly, witnessing, watching us, patiently and lovingly. Everyone here has best friends. Who doesn't have a best friend? Everyone has best friends. Well, let me ask, does anyone here have a best friend such that they are such a good friend that they will be with you and they will stick with you for lifetime after lifetime after lifetime, seeing you at your best, seeing you at your worst, seeing you at times when you don't even want to see yourself. And they never leave your side. And they are there patiently, lovingly, just waiting for you to understand that you're not alone. We all have best friends, but no one has a friend that well, that good, that loving. Not in the material world, but God is just such a best friend that He's constantly with us. He never leaves us. So, these are the three fundamental elements of reality. When looking back at this analogy from the Taittiriya Upanishad, all of reality can be broken down into one of these three things. Either God, see, the bird who's witnessing, or Atman, individual self, individual spirit, the bird who's eating, or matter, the tree. All of reality breaks down into one of these three different categories. This is one of the fundamental teachings of what's called Vedanta. Vedanta, the conclusion of the Vedas, the culmination of the Vedas. Now, where do we find ourselves presently? Where we find ourselves presently is that we are living in a form of seeming separation from God. And this is very important, seeming separation from God. Because, as I described, of course, God is with us. God is always within our hearts. So are we really separated from God? Of course not. However, we have the illusion of separation. Because we have this illusion of separation, which God allows us to have. Why? Because God loves us. Because He gives us free will. You know, if you supposedly have free will, but you don't have the freedom to make mistakes, actually your free will itself is an illusion. You know, what it means to have free will is that every so often we can make a mistake. And for us, that mistake is thinking that God has abandoned us and that we're alone in the universe. The truth is, God has never abandoned us, and we are not alone. God is here, present, now, within us, within all things. However, of course, we're not perceiving that. The situation that we find ourselves in now is what is called Maya. We are in illusion, this illusion of separation from the divine. As a result of having this illusion of separation, we act as if God does not exist. Thus, we act with anger, we act with lust, we act with avarice, with envy, with greed, with all of these more negative emotions and motivations. When we do this, of course, what happens? This is a part of the concept of dharma, of natural law. That one of the laws in the universe is that for every action that we perform, there is an equal and opposite reaction. Karma. Karma. As a result of this karma, we find ourselves in this world reincarnating from body to body to body. It's described in the Bhagavad Gita that in the same way that we remove old clothing when they've gotten old and broken, and we put on new clothing, in the same way that spirit that we truly are, which is eternal, in the same way will have one body. When that body finally breaks down, either due to illness, old age, accident, anything like this, then what happens is we take on another body in accordance with our karma, in accordance with our free will decisions in this world. This is what's called samsara, this cycle of birth and death, birth and death. And within this cycle, of course, we have the ability to essentially create our own future as a result of our consciousness. So when we talk about karma, we're not talking about fate. We're not talking about a punishment from God. God does not punish. Let me make this very clear by repeating this again. God does not punish. Rather, God sets into motion natural laws of the universe, which, if we understand those laws, that is dharma, And if we work in cooperation with Dharma, we elevate ourselves. If we do not work in cooperation with those natural laws of the universe, there are natural consequences. But Dharma itself, karma, these laws of the universe are neither good nor bad. Actually, truthfully, they're good because law is good. It's kind of like fire. Is fire good or bad? It's simply a part of nature. You can use fire to set fire to someone's home because you think they're an enemy and kill their whole family, or you can use that fire to illumine the world, to cook, to do so many positive things. But fire itself is neutral. In the same way, when we experience karma, including even bad karma, it's not a matter of God punishing us. God does not punish. Rather, again, by our own decisions, our free will, ethical decisions, we create what we shall be in the future. Now, again, there is this cycle of being born and dying, being born and dying. What is wonderful is that this is itself a manifestation of God's grace. Why? Because ultimately, whether we come to the point of self and God realization and have enlightenment and break free from this cycle or not is up to us. We have the ability to stop the cycle. And how do we do this? By precisely pursuing truth, by pursuing God. See, this whole talk is a cycle. Now we're going back to the beginning. How do we liberate ourselves? By this pursuit for truth. By exactly the pursuit for truth. However, now we come to a difference. Before, it's unconscious. See, most people will ask these philosophical questions. Again, who am I? Why am I here? But most people will ask these questions in an unconscious sort of way. They'll think about it for a short time, not come to any conclusions, go on with their life. Well, the way that we actually achieve liberation is by asking these questions consciously. Consciously. Truly wanting to know the answers. Pursuing those answers as if to know those answers and to know truth is the most important thing in existence. When we have that eagerness to know truth, we will know truth. Such is the nature of God, such is the nature of truth that it is rewarded when we search for that truth with sincerity. With sincerity. So this is the beginning. Next, we have to practice that truth. Because as people who come to all of my talks, all of my events know, this is something I stress. I'm a guy with a PhD, I'm very educated. Trust me, you can have 200 PhDs, you will not know God. A PhD is meaningless. You will not know God merely by intellectually grasping something, but rather it's by self-transformation, a transformation that occurs within the person. That is how we will know the Absolute, is by taking that truth and living it. By living truth, not merely thinking truth. When we begin to live truth, what does this mean? It means our entire lives change, but for the better. Now let me back up for a second because I don't want to scare people. When we begin to search for truth, what does this mean? When I say, our lives change completely. Does this mean that now, okay, I have to shave my head and I have to dress up like a monk and go live in an ashram and, just change my life completely, say goodbye to my parents? And is that what I mean by our lives change radically? No, that's not what I mean. Externally, our lives don't have to change that much. Our lives don't have to change that much at all. And I cannot stress this enough. I assume everyone here either has jobs or are students or doing something. Maybe the two of you don't have jobs yet, right? Your jobs are just to be cute right now. But most of us here have things that we do. We have responsibilities. You can continue with those responsibilities. You do not have to give them up. However, our lives do indeed change radically once we truly begin a sincere search for truth, in that our lives change within dramatically. And people who begin to traverse this path of truth, they can all attest to this fact, that suddenly within you are a changed being. Suddenly within you have a peace that you've never had before. Suddenly you have a meaning to your life that you didn't have before. Suddenly the world around you begins to make sense. And you begin to experience that bliss of Atman, of self, in ways that you never have before. You know within that little by little you are traversing on the right path toward God. And what does this look like? Practically, sadhana. Practice. Practice, practice, practice. This is the example that I give very often. Right now, it's as if we have amnesia. You know, we have forgotten. We have forgotten our true self. We have forgotten our connection with God. We have spiritual amnesia. How do you get rid of that amnesia? By practice. You know, by practice, by going to your home and by meeting the people you've known, by seeing pictures of your relatives, you know, by familiarizing yourself with your furniture, with your possessions, you know, with, oh, okay, well, this is the kind of music I used to listen to. These are the kinds of foods I used to enjoy eating. With the idea that little by little, by that practice, you will slowly remember. Well, this is sadhana. The way that we remember that true self, the way that we begin to experience the presence of God is by practicing that presence of God. Meditation. Meditation. Extremely important. And specifically, mantra meditation. Meditating on the divine names of God. It also includes beginning to study the scriptures. And to truly, truly begin to study them in an in-depth sort of way. And again, not an academic way. What I mean by study them in an in-depth sort of way is letting the scriptures speak to you. You know, very often we can read a book so quickly to the point where we're just looking at words on a piece of paper. If we read the Bhagavad Gita or other scriptures like that, it will not speak to us. However, when we open our hearts and take our time with a sacred scripture, oh, it's going to speak to you. And I mean with an audible voice. You will hear the words of Krishna enter into your heart as you read the Bhagavad Gita. And finally, for those individuals who are very serious, study with a guru. Very important. Very, very important. This is one of the elements that forms the heart of Hinduism, the heart of Sanatana Dharma. And this is why there is no sect, there is no tradition, no sampradaya within Sanatana Dharma that doesn't stress this. The importance of guru, that guru must be there constantly. You know, we need that guide such that we know that we're going along the path correctly. We need to have that guide. Very important. When we have all of these elements in place, what happens is the most amazing thing. We achieve what is called moksha. Moksha, liberation. You know, we've all heard this term before. Whether it's moksha or mukti in Sanskrit, liberation, enlightenment. You know, there are many terms for this. But what does this mean really? It means freedom. It means freedom. It means the freedom of knowing who and what we truly are and acting as such. When we speak about liberation, about moksha, we are talking about a radical existential freedom of the self. What is the most terrible thing for us? The most terrible thing is to not be free. For any living being. Take a little bird and put it in a cage. You know, take a cat, put it in a small box. Take a human being, put that human being in a prison cell. It's torture. Because it is not natural to who we are. We are born to be free. We are meant to be free. Well, the basis of true freedom is spiritual. And when we have this liberation, it's precisely that, as the word indicates, liberation, freedom. We begin to experience life like we've never experienced it before. If you can imagine, and there are so many analogies, even Plato gives a wonderful analogy of this in his book, The Republic. He talks about something called the simile of the cave. And without going too deeply, I'll just give you a nutshell version of what he says. You can envision some people who, from the moment they were born, imagine if they were kept prisoner in a cave, and all that they could see is the wall in front of them, and they're in darkness. And they can't even see themselves, they can't see any of the other people who are there. And imagine if one of those people were let loose from their bonds and brought up little by little to the light. At first they would be scared. At first they would be scared. In fact, before that, they wouldn't even believe that there was anything other than that cave. You can tell them, oh, guess what? There's a whole world out there. They wouldn't even believe you at first. But that's okay. You bring them up, and then they start to get scared. And then they see this bizarre thing. What is that? What is it? It's light. Because they've never experienced light. And then finally you bring them out of the cave altogether, and they realize that there was an entire world, a realm that they knew nothing of, that's there for them to experience. This is the spiritual process. This is liberation, is arising from the cave and seeing the sun. And that sun is Bhagavan. That sun is God. So this is the goal for all of us. And more. I'm going to finish by just telling everyone this. And if you take anything home with you tonight, please take this. You can achieve liberation in this lifetime. Liberation is for you. You can achieve liberation in this lifetime. This idea that, oh no, it'll take us millions of lifetimes, that's if you're not seeking it. But if you're seeking it, you can be free in this lifetime. If you truly want it. That's the nature of God's mercy. He gives us what we truly want. So have that eagerness. Have that eagerness. We know that even in this material world, can you achieve anything of importance if you're not eager? If you don't have that desire? You know, you want to become anything. You want to become a doctor, you want to become a professor, you want to become a millionaire. If you don't have eagerness, do you think you'll achieve it? If your attitude is just, oh yeah, well, we'll see if it happens, it won't happen. It won't happen if that's your attitude. But if you have that desire, if you have that passion, if you have that magnificent obsession such that you say, nothing will stop me, and I will know the truth, and I will live my life the way it's meant to be lived, in perfection, in absolute excellence, and achieve that bliss that I already am, and that bliss of devotion and love for God that I am meant to have. If you have that eagerness, you will achieve that. You will achieve it, I guarantee. Okay? So with that, I thank you all very much. Jaya Sriman Narayana.